Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate everyone's made the time to check out our webinar on body-worn cameras. This is the first of a few webinars we have planned for the rest of this year, so keep an eye open for the invitations. Same channel you got them through today is how you'll get them in the future. We're going to jump right in here. We are honored to have a couple of special guests from Oxford Properties. I'm going to read a quick bio here to introduce our guests, and then we'll jump into some questions regarding body-worn cameras. So our first guest is Mr. David Sulston. David's the Director of Security for Oxford Properties, which is a global property management company, and is responsible through his team for overseeing physical security, emergency management, and health and safety programs. David's been involved in the industry for over 30 years and holds a Master's of Science degree in Security and Risk Management from the University of Leicester. David is board certified through ASIS as a Certified Protection Professional, or CPP, and Physical Security Professional, PSP. David is a founding member of the Commercial Real Estate Security Group, a co-founder of the Canadian Security Lifesaver Association, and an active member of BOMA, Toronto Security and Risk Management Advisory Committee, and was previously an executive committee member of the Commercial Real Estate Cyber Consortium. So David, hopefully you can start accomplishing some things at some point. Just kidding. That's quite a list, guys. That's
Thanks,
quite
James.
a list. With David, we have Mr. Neil Matthews. Neil is the Senior Manager of Emergency Management and Business Continuity at Oxford Properties. He's worked in the industry for 27 years, 15 of those with Oxford Properties. He's got a number of ASIS certifications. In fact, I believe this is called the Triple Crown, is it not, Neil? The Triple Crown. He's a CPP, a PSP, and a Professional Certified Investigator, a PCI. There's not a ton of Triple Crowns in Canada, folks, so we're lucky to have Neil with us. He's got certification in business continuity management. He's also certified in CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. So thank you both for joining us. I'm really pleased to have you both here. I've been excited and looking forward to this conversation since we started talking about it about, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. The topic, oh, thank you. The topic of the day is body-worn cameras. So for those that don't know, David Sulston was featured in Canadian Security Magazine as Security Director of the Year, I believe, last year. And part of that, I think, was due to his outstanding efforts deploying body-worn cameras throughout Oxford's portfolio, which I know Neil had a huge role in supporting. So my first question for the two of you is, what prompted you to explore body-worn cameras? I mean, they're a big topic, topic du jour in policing and law enforcement. But was there a specific incident that spurred this, or was it in response to more general changes in the industry?
From my perspective, James, it was changes in the industry. So we had the opportunity to go to different sites and see the practices that they were using. And we had a couple properties that were already using them. But, as you put a corporate hat on, there's some risk involved when you're using technology that maybe doesn't have that governance around it. We'll get more into the conversation around governance. But we had discussions with the security officers at the different sites that were using them. They were all over them. They took away the he said, she said pieces that we see in this industry, and much like police officers do. So it was just, how can we use any technology, and this technology specifically, to assist us to reduce risk? That was kind of where it started.
That makes perfect sense to me. And I think it's interesting. I've talked to a few people who, when you talk about body-worn cameras, their initial thought is, well, that's easy. Just grab a camera and stick it on the front of a guard, and you can just push go and they can do their thing. Having done a couple of deployments myself, much smaller scale than Oxford's efforts. I think we have body-worn cameras at 3 or 4 properties that are sort of Paladin driven as opposed to client driven deployments. There's a lot to think about. I think we had to write a policy and procedure manual on how to use the things. There's logistics as to when and how you're going to turn them on. What was the most challenging part of the implementation once you made the decision to pull the trigger, so to speak?
Well, we did it in several phases. First is that socialization of the concept, right? Because there's not a lot of private companies that are doing this. It's fairly par for the course for a lot of police forces, but from private industry, not so much. So when you chat about that from the perspective of risk and what this can possibly offset for us, then you need the buy-in from executive, right? And what are their concerns? Because if you take a look at some of the obstacles, right? So the security managers are worried that their folks are going to do something wrong. The folks that are wearing them potentially worried that they're going to be tracked in some way, right? The executive saying, hey, this is an unerasable record that could hang around forever. But the reality is everybody's recording all the time. Anyway, every 13-year-old has a cell phone. All we're doing is making darn sure that we have an unrefutable record, right, of what actually transpired as opposed to anything that may be edited.
Yeah.
So that's so the next step of, once we get the go ahead to start exploring, then the next step after that is to pilot. And Neil, do you want to chat about, because you were instrumental in putting together a lot of pilots?
Yeah, I mean, we actually did 6 pilots at one of our largest shopping centers. Again, as you said, James, it's much more than slapping a GoPro on your vest and hoping for the best. There was a lot of things that we had to do prior. The storage, how much storage are we going to need? We started our project in 2018 in the month of August, and we have 31,708 clips, for lack of a better term, of evidence in our storage, taking up about 7 terabytes. And then you have to decide, what are you going to keep? Not everything needs to be kept. Some things, maybe you're going to go to court down the road, so we need to keep that. But after the 30 days, maybe things just fall off, just like the regular cameras in the food court. So there was a lot of work prior. I think you said it, James, SOPs. When do these get turned on? When do they get turned off? Does everybody turn them on? If several people are at a call, there's only one person, so there was a lot of logistics that had to be covered. And then there was also a lot of privacy issues that thankfully Dave took off my plate and did a lot of the corporate work in the background, cybersecurity assessments, the privacy, how long we were going to keep things for, the need to tell people when we're recording at the earliest opportunity that they're being video and audio recorded. So there's a lot of logistics before we even started the pilot. So there's a lot of things to think about. It's not just as easy as GoPro.
Yeah, absolutely. Your guys' answer reminded me of 2 things. Probably 15 years ago, I tried body-worn camera deployment at a very specific post-secondary institution at the client's request. Now this was when body-worn cameras were not what they are today. They were large and clunky devices that if you were lucky, they had some kind of night vision, but generally the audio wasn't good. They weren't very well put together at this point. But I remember the client calling me and saying, you need to come and pick up all these cameras and remove them from the site. And so I went up to the property and asked why. And they said, because it's an invasion of the guards' privacy that we're filming them when they go to the bathroom. And I'm like, that wasn't the intention of these things at all. We didn't want you turning them on while you're going to the bathroom. That was never the thoughts, The other thing I wondered about, and I don't know if you can't answer this question, don't. It's a bit of a curveball, but something you said, Neil, about you've got this I'm going to call it a fairly substantial number of clips saved on a fairly substantial amount of hard drive space. Is there one person who's the gatekeeper of deciding what stays and what goes, or is it a decentralized effort?
It was a centralized effort between myself, Dave, and privacy.
Okay.
For lack of a better term, we classify things as evidence or not evidence. So an interaction with someone that isn't going to go anywhere, it isn't going to go to human rights, it isn't going to be a lawsuit. That's just an everyday interaction that we had that will drop after 30 days. If it's an arrest, then we categorize that as an arrest, and that becomes evidence. And according to our business policy, we have made a decision on how long we want to keep that footage for, and that's how long we're going to keep it for. So there is a retention schedule that Dave and privacy worked out.
Yeah, it's so important.
I think
it's so important to figure that out. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, that's the key, is that you get those ducks in a row before you deploy. So you have those long, thoughtful conversations ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. And it's interesting. I don't want to ask what your specific policies are on retention, because I think that's a private thing for Oxford. But it seems to me if there's something that's going to come from it, you need to keep it longer than you think you do. In my experience, sometimes the feedback comes 2 years after an incident where somebody starts to challenge what was done or what was said. or maybe even longer in some cases. I mean, it seems to me we need to err on the side of caution, but also be realistic and reasonable in what we're expected to do. And something else I want to touch on that you talked about, Dave, before I move to the next question. You talked about the fact that everyone has cameras now, and it's absolutely true. You'll see, I mean, we see there's some famous cases recently where criminal acts are just being filmed by people who aren't actually doing it. They're not doing anything to stop it. They're just filming it. But I guess the other concern is people are capturing, say, the actions of security officers or the actions of the police officers, but they're only catching the final 5 minutes of, say, a 40-minute conversation, and then it paints the incident in the wrong context. So I can absolutely see the value of this type of technology. But this leads to my next question, which is, I've been doing a little bit of reading into this myself, and you know, the initial thought on body-worn cameras is that, well, they're going to provide more accountability and everyone will behave better if they know they're being filmed. And then I'm hearing that maybe that's not true, or maybe there's some people questioning whether that's actually impactful. I'm curious if you've measured this, but have you noticed an impact on interactions and outcomes since deployment? Like, are people being filmed behaving better? Are security officers behaving better?
Yeah, but you know what? And it's a great question, and it's one of the business cases that we put together. As we want to enhance the professionalism of the industry, we want to enhance, how the public's perceiving, not only the security teams, but we also want to kind of mitigate any escalation as they're having confrontations or discussions with individuals that they have to deal with on a daily basis. So vast majority, absolutely. If you know you're being taped, right?
Yeah.
And it's, you can't say to the court afterwards, I didn't say that. Yet it does de-escalate, and for our teams as well, they're highly conscious of the way that their behavior reacts. Now, the reality is that also comes down to training, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is how we interact with the public. So if you have someone on your team, and we've all worked with people that they behave in ways that we don't want to, that becomes a different conversation at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
But at the get-go, with or without body-worn cams, there's expectations of what the behavior needs to be, right? Yeah. And this is just a tool to help monitor to an extent, but doesn't really monitor. What I think it does is it saves the bacon of the security teams to deal with difficult situations every single day.
Right. No, I can appreciate that, and I've been training officers I've worked with. The idea that you have to assume you're always being filmed. Every action you have to take the high road every time and assume that someone is filming you, because the prevalence of cameras now. It's sort of funny. I think back to, I mean, you guys have both been around long enough to remember this, but there was a time in shopping centers where there was a rule that you couldn't take photographs. And that was back when a photograph would be a huge Canon camera on a tripod, and someone would come in and maybe start taking pictures of stores, trying to steal the look or the IP, the intellectual property of, say, Aritzia. I want to copy Aritzia, so I'm going to take pictures. I mean, if you tried to say no photography in a mall now, you could, that'd be your job for the rest of time. With every parent taking pictures of their kid eating food with the chopsticks for the first time, or a kid pushing, running around the mall, or selfies and all these different things. It's become so prevalent that we have to really be aware of it, which ties into my next question. We talked about the impact on officer behavior as a result of the cameras. Have you received feedback from the guards that are actually wearing them? Like what's that been like?
Yeah, like Neil and I chatted about it this morning. So Neil, do you want to cover that?
Yeah.
It's a great story.
Yeah. So basically, like I said, we did 6 pilots at one of our major shopping centers. After the 6 different products, there was clearly a winner that we thought was best and that we wanted to go with. But of course, the pilot had to come to an end. So we had to, take them all off and ship them back in boxes. And literally the next day, the officer said, "When can we get these back? We want them back." It de-escalated and made their jobs easier, that they were like, "Man, now we got to go back to not having them. No, we want them. When can we get them back?" That was literally less than 24 hours after we took them off them. So that's how much the guys and girls, do like them.
Yeah. One of the best quotes that I heard come out from one of our teams was that she said to me, "Dave, this didn't like the complaints didn't dwindle, right? The he said, she said, they disappeared like overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah,
that's critical.
Yeah, I think we had a partner, a police officer in Calgary that uses it as well, and I think he said it best. He goes, "The camera has no skin in the game. It just tells you what happened. It doesn't have. It's not on the security officer side. It's not on the other person's side. It just tells you what happened."
Right on, right on. Diego, I see your hand up. Is there a question you want to flag for us?
So you guys have answered some of the questions people have been putting in the chat, but there's one here that's very interesting by Shane Ferguson. He asked, how do body cameras worn by security personnel impact the level of safety and accountability in public spaces?
Impact the safety and accountability of security in public spaces. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, so how do body cameras worn by security personnel impact the level of safety and accountability in public spaces?
I
think we've touched on that a bit already.
You have.
Dave, I saw your mouth.
yeah,
start
I'm
moving.
just like the absolutely significantly more accountable than 30 years ago, right? Because there's a record there.
Yeah.
And I mean there is a potential, like some of the platforms allow for a dispatch, for instance, to auto turn on the cameras. In our case, like we're in a position where the teams are activating them when they have confrontations or when they anticipate any sort of confrontations. But there is the potential that we haven't activated where they can actually activate them remotely. And there's ones that activate for the sound of gunfire, for instance, but that's not the rule that we're in. But absolutely much more accountable than it would have been like decades ago.
Yeah, there was no accountability decades ago, just what you put on a piece of paper with a pencil. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, I think accountability is the key. We've had situations where people have stitched together 8 minutes of video, but we actually have the full 30 minutes. So, we have what actually happened versus what they're trying to make it look like it happened. Our cameras also have GPS monitoring in them, so we also know where the officers are at all times for safety. So it's accountability it improved the quality of our security interactions, and it decreased the escalation. Once people know they're on camera, they're like, they tend to behave better. Not everyone, but once you know you're being filmed, you tend to behave yourself a little bit better.
Of course, and that brings me a question. This is off the script here a little bit, but I'm just curious. And if I don't need you to share the specifics of your policy, but maybe you can talk a little bit to this. So you walk in, an officer walks into a scene. My recollection with your specific cameras is they hit a button on their chest, almost like when you're hailing the Enterprise on Star Trek. You just push the button, the camera initiates and captures a certain amount of information. How are you informing, or what's our duty, I guess, to inform the person we're interacting with, and what's your suggestion on that approach? Like, how do you tell them, hey, you're on film? Is it that simple?
Yeah, that's for organizations to actually work out their policy on how they want to do that, right?
Yeah.
So, and obviously the situation can be different as well. So if one of the security teams gets into something immediately without even the ability to turn that on until later, or there's no time to say, hey, just to let you know you're being recorded. There's also a buzzer that goes off, or a sound that goes off every 2 minutes that emits when it's being recorded.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
it keeps you alerted that it's turned on. Okay.
There's a buzzer and a vibration, so it makes you aware that you are being, you haven't turned your camera off. There is, as Dave said, there you could turn the corner and see a fight and press the button and run in and intervene. I think our policy is to notify the people as soon as reasonably as possible. So if you're just walking up to them, you would normally say, hi sir, our interaction is going to be audio and visually recorded, and they usually point to the camera. The people look at it and say, okay, they acknowledge it, or they'll tell them when it's reasonable. Our particular cameras also have a pre-event buffer of 30 seconds. So basically, when the officers make the conscious decision in their mind to turn the camera on, we are going to see, to your point, James, before 30 seconds of video before they made the conscious effort to turn it on. There will not be audio, but you will, as you said before, sometimes you don't see the beginning. Here, you're going to see 30 seconds before the officer actually made the decision in his mind to turn the camera on. So
Yeah, I like
sometimes that catches flashes of why he did what he did.
100%. And I would think, speaking candidly about it, I would think that also, um, it makes the officer account. It means the officer can't decide, I'm going to act like this, and now I'm going to turn my camera on, and it's going to look like I was the star. If the 30 seconds before I was being inappropriate or I wasn't handling myself well, that'll come through. I think that's a great aspect in terms of the accountability. And it's interesting, my question about how the guards reacted. It makes me happy to hear that they were so excited to get the cameras back, because it's the first time I can think of where some equipment that we deploy to security guards is that appreciated. We're typically doing things like, hey, we're deploying a guard tour system. We need you to do this from now on. And most of the staff are like, oh man, like this is one more thing on top of it. But I'm really pleased it was received so positively. Leading to my next question. I think we've got some questions coming up in the chat we can get to as well. But I can speaking for myself. When we deployed cameras within Paladin, I had some expectations in terms of outcomes. I kind of thought how they would land and what they would do and the kinds of benefits they would have. And I think it sounds like, giving thought to this before you launched, you probably had expectations or some idea of what you hope to see. Was there anything surprising or unexpected when you launched it? Did anything shock you besides the guards being so excited about wearing them?
I guess, the gift of unintended consequences. If we go back to that whole scenario of 20 years ago, and it's what you read on a report.
Yeah.
And with the executives, when they read a report, and it could be on something that's a very violent arrest, for instance, or very violent incident, they get kind of a sterilized 8.5 by 11 piece of paper written out. And if you see that now with the video, they truly get an understanding of what the teams deal with on a regular basis.
I like that.
So I think that was very helpful. So it's one thing to say that, holy smokes, there's terrible things happening in and around the community because of, well, post-pandemic or whatever, mental health crises, opioid crises, but actually seeing that in living color it underlines the criticality of what they're dealing with.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. One piece of feedback I've heard several times, especially post-COVID, if we are post-COVID, but in the post-pandemic sort of world we live in, where we've got a little bit more challenge with people pushing back on authority. We're seeing a little more like sort of that post-pandemic rage, I think some people label it as. One thing I've received from property managers is, well, why did it take so long to get that person to comply with the request to leave? And it's like, well, you kind of had to be there to understand how heated and how challenging this was. And I can appreciate that, being able to kind of say, well, here's the report and here's the video. Now you know why it took 40 minutes to get that person to comply, because they were not reasonable or they were struggling or having a mental health crisis, etc. So that I can see that value. Absolutely. On that note, and I'm hoping you can share something, but if you can't, I understand. Do you have a specific example of an incident or scenario where the body-worn camera has been a significant contributor to the success of the interaction or the outcome?
There's a couple that underscore it for me. I'm not going to point out specific instances, but generally it's the same thing where we had individuals behave in such a manner that they were going after, they wanted to sue, right? And accused our teams of acting inappropriately.
Yeah.
And two of these issues, we literally just download the tape, give it to their attorney, game over. It's game set. And you posed an interesting question, off the record before on how do you gauge this? What are the metrics? What are the outcomes? How do you know a tree falls in the forest, right? When no one's there to see it. Well, how do we know what we've avoided by the fact that we have technology in place?
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
we may have already put to bed a number of different incidents that would have cost us time, money, and grief that frankly, we're not aware of that. So that's kind of where my headspace is with that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and that's the age-old security challenge, isn't it? If I was talking to somebody about this on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that came up was, if you had a perfect security program, there'd be no incidents, and therefore, why do we have a security program? And so it's an interesting sort of chicken egg sort of scenario that's come up so many times over the years. Diego, do we have any more questions in the chat before I get to? I've got one final question that I have scripted, but I'm curious if we've got anything in the chat.
Definitely, you have answered a lot of the questions here, but we can definitely ask some, give some time at the end to answer some of the questions. But for now, one of the constant ones has been for Dave and Neil, how do you manage the digital storage of body cam video, and how do you facilitate the transfer of that digital evidence with law enforcement or legal?
Neil, leave that
Sure,
one to
I
you.
can
You
take
play with
this
that
one.
all the time.
So there's multiple companies out there that you can go with body cams, and they're all going to have their different ways of storage. Our storage is in the cloud, secured. We did a cybersecurity assessment on it, and our footage can be, Dave and I and the security managers can reach it from anywhere. So from home, from their laptop, from their phone. And again, we bought an amount of storage that we thought we would need. But again, we working out retention policies and things like that. Again, things are going to, the vast majority of things might fall off in 30 days. So the the slip and falls, the trip and falls, the arrests, the things that might result in litigation are kept. We have not, since 2018, had to buy any more storage than the storage we originally bought, simply because it ebbs and flows. You can see it going up, and then you can see it going down. And I get a report every 30 days of things, that are upcoming for deletion. And Dave and I can say, yep, those are all good to be deleted, and they all get deleted. So it's all about the storage and what you want to keep. If you want to keep every single clip, you're going to need a lot of storage. And like I said, we have, as of my last count this morning, 31,708, I believe. Some of those clips might be 1 minute. Some of those clips might be an hour and a half, depending on the situation. So, you have to have a retention policy and, work with your provider on, the storage and, are you doing a la carte? Are you going to just keep buying storage? Or are you going to have unlimited storage? Things like that.
That's a great point, and I'll add to that a question that's just jumped into my mind. Obviously, for those of you on the line on the call today that don't know this, as much as it seems like storage must be free because I can have a free email account with a ton of data in it and no one calls me on it, it's not. So when you get into terabytes of cloud-based storage, there is a charge for it, and obviously there's a whole bunch of factors that go into what that amount is going to be. I'm curious, would you say that the cost of that storage is outweighed by the value the cameras bring to the program?
It's all part of licensing fees, right? At the end of the day, that's how it gets calculated. That's how it gets paid out. So if you add on a ton more storage, your licensing fees are likely to go up. At least in our case, but we've found we haven't needed it. So, but yeah, no, that's a great point, James. It depends on what you buy. Like Neil said earlier, you get what you pay for type of idea, right?
Yeah. Diego, I think there was a part 2 to that question. I'm pretty sure that first question you shared with us came from my longtime friend and colleague, Mr. Bob Riddle, and I think he had a follow-up question if I saw that chat out of the corner of my eye. Can you share that one with us?
Yeah. So the follow-up question is the digital storage maintained in sovereign Canadian locations? And second question, is that an issue under consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. So same considerations all corporations go through, right? We want to make sure that we have control of where our pieces are stored, and most major corporations right now, like they have servers in Canada, in the US, in different areas where they're intending to do business, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And obviously it's a concern with the Patriot Act and all these other reasons why it's important. It's important to most of our clients as a security provider, but it's important to a whole bunch of government agencies and pseudo government agencies and all that stuff. And I agree with you. It's sure shifted. I mean, 15 years ago, you might have a challenge finding Canadian-based storage that was just in Canada. And I think now it's more and more the norm, which is fantastic. Diego, is there anything else jumping up in the chat right now?
Well, if you guys have time, we can give time at the end for questions, but there's a technical one maybe for you, Neil, as well. There's one at the here. Give me 2 seconds. Oh yeah. So in your experience, from Logan Sininger, It says, in your experience, are body cameras always deployed with PPE vest, or do you have examples of utilizing cams without vests?
We do not have any cameras that are not with a bulletproof vest. That's not to say we didn't consider those. Some of our concierges have, challenges that, of homeless or vagrant people coming in the lobbies, and they have interactions with them, but they're not clearly wearing bulletproof vests. They're in the suits and ties. So we talked about that, but I don't see there's no reason why you can't. And there are, again, depending on what company you go with, there's various styles of cameras. There's, obviously the one that sits on the middle of the chest, but there's also ones that are very inconspicuous, that are very small, and they can go on the side of glasses, or it can go on your collar. There's variations of cameras that you have, so you don't necessarily need to think it's that chunky box on your front. Yes, that's what we are using, but there's different cameras that you can use depending on the company. But no, we don't have anything that's not on a bulletproof vest. But that's not to say that tomorrow we might not change that idea.
And so what I'll do is I'll ask my last question, my last official question anyway, and then what we can do, Diego, is if you've got some more in the chat, we can burn through those sort of ad hoc as we close out the time we have today. So my last question was, if a property or property manager was considering body-worn cameras, what's one piece of advice you would want to share based on your experience?
Get the governance hammered out first before you even start to pilot. Who's going to wear it, under what circumstances do they get turned on? When can't they be used? Like if you're in an interview room or right, washrooms, and we talked about things, if they're going into a washroom to deal with a medical call, let them know what the retention is, who has approval to delete. Like there's a myriad of different considerations, but fortunately a lot of the police forces have already done the homework and actually publicly posted that you can kind of cut and paste. The world is an oyster for information now on what works best for your organization.
I agree with you. That was my experience as well. Neil, do you have any thoughts as what your one piece of info would be, or do you agree with Dave?
I totally agree with Dave. As much as we prepared, maybe 1 or 2 weeks into it, I was turning to Dave going, Dave, this came up. What do you want to do? We never thought about this. There will be things that, you have to think about after, but yeah, definitely trying to get all your ducks in a row first makes it much, much easier to deploy.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And that was my experience as well. There, when you think about it going, oh, it's easy, just slap a camera on people and have them run around. But there's way more to think about when you start getting into the nitty gritty. So that's good. One question that off the top of my head that was not on my list, hopefully it's not too much of a curveball, but so if I'm working at an Oxford property, I'm deployed in my Oxford uniform, I got my tactical uniform on, I've got my body cam on, I respond to an incident and I turn the camera on, I do everything I'm supposed to do, and now it's time to write the report. Am I able to view the footage from my interaction to help inform the report, or do you ask the guards to not look at the footage? And if you can't answer, I understand. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
No, I think if you're writing it right after, and you've got a good record of what transpired, it helps you with your memory. I do the same thing when you go to court. Can I refer to my notes to refresh my memory, right?
Yeah.
And to make sure that you're getting this right, right? It's not like the video is going to disappear. There's precious few people that have that ability to delete it. So I would use it again as a tool, like any technology tool that you consider deploying. Do the research on it and use it for all the benefits that it can give you.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good answer. Diego, do we have anything in the chat?
Definitely. You guys have answered most of the questions here, but I guess you already talked about this a bit, but what was that from Tyler Stoutenberg? What was the biggest challenge you encountered in rolling out the body-worn cameras at your properties?
Yeah, Neil, that's kind of the tech side. I think you and I chatted about this morning, if you wanted to hit on that.
Yeah, so to give context, we rolled out originally about 175 cameras across Canada. So various cities, various regions, various properties. Not every one was a shopping center. So we did rely heavily on our supplier for guidance, but it also does take a little bit of tech savvy and IT on the site level. You are going to be requested to open and close ports. You are going to have a basic understanding of network operations. And that, if anyone's on the call here that knows me, that ain't me, right? People ask me what kind of computer I have. I go, a black one. That's all I know. I am not going to be the guy that can set up the network connection. So you do have to rely on either someone with IT knowledge at your property, or you do have to rely on some IT people from your organization to help out, because there is some technical requirements that are over most people's heads, because hey, that's not my job to know how to run a network. So that's the biggest challenge. But once you overcome that at one site, it's overcome everywhere.
Awesome.
Diego, anything else?
Yeah, so a lot of these techie questions, I guess, Neil, you're kind of like the chosen one here. But Steve Ely asked, any concerns regarding ownership of data if you change BWC providers?
In the contract, all data's ours, period, full stop.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So if I'm
That's
hearing
an easy
then,
one.
if you were going to switch from ABC camera to DEF camera, your contract is secure enough that all that data, that the 31,000 clips that Neil mentioned, all just transfer over to wherever you tell them to put it, and it's done. No
Yeah.
issues. It's yours. Got it.
Yep.
Yeah. Good thinking. Good thinking.
Yeah. Here's another one from Sauda Khan. Says, hey guys, you mentioned during the pilot that the guards were happy to wear the cameras going forward. Did you encounter anyone who refused to wear it? And if so, how did you handle it?
Hey, Sadia, great question. So yeah, in any organization, there will be at least one person for whatever reason that doesn't want to. Again, that's a training and expectation conversation between them and their manager. Right? That's it at the end of the day. There's all sorts of things that people may not necessarily want to do in their jobs, but when we're trying to mitigate against risk, yeah, the transparent conversation, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is the benefit both to the organization and to you, and this is where we're going.
Amazing. Anything else, James?
Oh, I mean, only if you've got some stuff in your in the chat that popped up.
You've knocked a lot of these questions. There's one, I guess you already touched on, the moving to cloud for saving the data. I think that's it, guys. Anything you want to touch on, James?
Not specifically. I do think that I think it's good for us in the security industry to be thinking about technology and how it's going to interact in our world. We're in an increasingly integrated world. I'll put it that way. And the traditional approach to security operations, I don't think, is going to fit forever. We're going to have to adjust and evolve as we go. And I think this type of technology, body-worn cameras, things that add to the accountability both for the people we're dealing with and for our guard staff. To me, it's a similar conversation actually to, we talked about guard tour systems. I remember guys saying, I'm not going to do the guard tour. And then I would say to the guy, well, if there's a break-in tonight, how are you going to prove to me that you were doing your job and not sleeping in the break room? You see that the guard tour is going to save you in that situation. So start thinking about it as a tool that's protecting you rather than a hindrance to your job. And honestly, if one of my people was like, I'm refusing to wear the body cam, my biggest concern would be, why? What are you hiding? Like, what are you doing that you don't want people to see? Because that's the only thing I can think of, unless someone can come to me with a more logical explanation. But you're on company time and performing company work. As far as I'm concerned, we can kind of watch you do that if we have to, if it's part of a risk mitigation and liability management program. I think I'm really pleased with the conversation we generated here today, folks, and thank you all for participating. Thank you all for the questions and things in the chat here. I see there's a lot of positive information in chat going on between different guests on the call, so I'm pleased this generated some conversation and some back and forth. Hopefully some of you know each other and you can talk offline as well. I see actually there's one question here from one of my old colleagues from Concord Security, Ken Cackler. He's asking, and I know this will apply because you have properties in provinces where I think you may have unionized environments. Were any of the deployments in a unionized environment? And if so, were there any pain points related to the union?
unexpectedly, no, like we do, yeah, unionized environments, and that was one of our, not necessarily concern, consideration. No issues, like no issue, transparent conversations. Hey, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it, and yeah,
Excellent.
just be honest.
Excellent. And I see another question from Tyler. I think Tyler, if I'm getting it's Tyler Stutenberg, I believe is the regional security manager for CF based out of Calgary, if I have the right person in my brain. He's asked a couple of questions today, but one thing has just popped into my head. For those that don't know how these work, at some point, either during my shift or at the end of my shift, I have to remove this body-worn camera and plug it into a dock. And then the syncing process occurs whereby the video footage and audio collected on that camera is then uploaded to the cloud. So it's invisible to anyone until I do that syncing docking thing. Now, obviously, anytime you're connecting points together and clicking things together and pushing buttons, there's wear and tear. How has the reliability been on the devices you chose? I believe you chose a model that is fairly well established with police forces across North America, probably, or maybe the world. I don't know. How's reliability been? Have you had many issues of breakdowns?
One, maybe.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we had one. And again, that's a good question. Everything is encrypted, even in the transfer of data to the cloud, so it's encrypted. Everything is encrypted on the camera, so even if the camera were to fly off in a violent arrest and someone picks it up and runs away with it, there's nothing they can do with it to get the video because they don't have the software. So no, our camera, and again, what we chose in the pilot was, extreme, we have, we're in Edmonton. What happens if I drop it in the snow and I find it, a day later and it's frozen? Will it work? What about extreme heat? What about water? What about dropping it? What about it slamming? So there was a lot of requirements that we had for the body worn camera itself as a unit. And then I will throw out that, there is a lot of bells and whistles to some of these products. You can go 1080p, and I think, Dave, we decided not to do that because we didn't want to see better than the human eye.
Sure.
You don't want to go to court and say, well, I thought that wallet was a gun, that's why I did X. Well, you can clearly see it's not a gun. Well, that's in 1080p. I can only see in 720. So there's a lot of, you don't maybe necessarily need everything they come with, especially you got to do a lot of thinking, and again, that's the SOP part of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the questions from Paladin's National Training Manager, Jason Magalenis, he asked about challenges when recalling the footage when incidents go to court. Although what I'm hearing from you guys is that this typically avoids court because the person knows there's video footage, everything's captured, maybe their case is gone.
Yeah.
And in
Sorry, go
our,
ahead, Neil.
and then again, depending on who you choose, you can become partner agencies, so Toronto Police, Calgary Police, Edmonton Police Services all use the same cameras as we do. Therefore, we're now partner agencies. So there's no more thumb drives, there's no more discs, there's no more having to have an officer come to your desk and pick anything up. It's literally like, here's my footage. And it can go both ways. Sometimes they say, hey, here's a bolo. If you see the person in the mall, let us know. So you can become partner agencies with police forces that have the same camera. But even if you have a police force that doesn't have a body-worn camera or has a different system, it is still literally just giving them a secure email and they can get the footage. So it's very easy.
And it's audited, right? There's audit tracking right across the board.
That's the other thing. There's nothing that anybody can do that isn't audited. And again, I just throw out there that I think Dave mentioned it very quickly. There's only some people that we're allowed to delete footage, and obviously we got to control that quite strictly.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember my first deployment, however many years ago that was, 25 years ago. The camera system was a 16-channel MUX with VHS tapes. And the beauty of that was if something went sideways, the guard could run to the desk, eject the tape, rewind it by 30 minutes and hit record again. And all his problems were gone. So it's critically important to control access to deletion. One of the other questions in the chat, I'm just sniping a few of them here. Bob Riddles asked about the prevalence of these body cams in the industry. And I'd say it's still very small. I think there's a handful of properties that have chosen to do this, Oxford being one of them. But I would say the majority have not elected to go this route, whether it's concern about potential liability or perhaps the challenge of all the governance. It becomes such a mountain. It's sort of like, well, is this the project we want to invest our time in, or do we want to invest our time in other things? I know with previous experience, legal was always concerned about, a lot of questions about body cams and the use of body cams. And I know those are things you can get through, but if your legal department isn't interested in navigating that, then it's a roadblock to doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, I've had a couple of conversations with colleagues in our competitive set, and frankly, they're going forward. I know, down the road, we did some of the trailblazing, but it's going to become ubiquitous. It's going to become the norm, much like everyone was so hesitant about CCTV 25, 30 years ago. And now you're actually potentially negligent if you don't have those types of controls in place. Are we there yet with BWC? Maybe not, but I think it's going to become pretty common.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so I'm going to snipe one more question here because it's come up with a couple of clients very specifically. And I don't know if this came up in your discussions or if it's something that gets tabled now that you've got this deployed. Is there any concern from the public that you're deploying facial recognition in with the cameras that are attached to the officers? And was that even an option when you looked at various solutions?
Yeah, we actually created a piece for if anyone had any inquiries, like an FAQ, and that was one of them. No, there's no facial recognition on them, and there's all sorts of analytics that are available out there. But I think, like, we have a really good privacy department, and they can cut the wheat from the chaff on, what's reasonable and what's not reasonable. And I don't, we've seen so many instances of facial recognition not being there yet to the point where it's going to potentially get you in trouble. I'm excited about the new technologies out there because I want to see them used to actually minimize the opportunity for crime. But let's tread carefully, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's interesting. We watch those like CSI type crime shows where they use a camera and zoom in on a blurry image and get a crystal clear picture of a suspect, or can use facial recognition to review a million faces and find their bad guy in the weeds. And what I've seen is that we're not there yet. That's all Hollywood. It's a dream that hopefully one day we can achieve, but right now it's just not there. I agree with you on facial recognition. I think it's an interesting thing. I think it has some useful applications, but until we see nearing 100% reliability, it becomes a very slippery slope, especially when we're in shopping center environments where there's youth and marginalized people and all sorts of other things that make it challenging to have that type of image retention or image analysis. So
absolutely.
Well, we have burned up 48 hours of the minute that the hour that I put aside for this today, which is great. I sincerely appreciate both your guys' time. I think we can probably wrap this up. This session was recorded, so if anyone's interested in sharing it or watching it again, listening to it again, reach out to us and let us know, and we can help you out. Dave, thank you so much for your time today. Much appreciated.
Anytime, James.
And Neil, thank you so much as well. Great to meet you today, and thanks for sharing your knowledge with the group.
Great meeting you. Thanks, James.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Great day, all.
Bye, guys.
Have a great day.
Cheers.